I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of the...
Awesome. Well, let's get rolling. Got a crew here tonight ready to talk about DEQ on the Oregon D.O.G.E. We got State Representative Greg Smith.
Thank you for allowing me to be here. It's good to be with my buddies from the Senate.
Former colleagues in the House. Senator David Brock Smith, welcome back.
Thank you for being here.
Ty, good to see you again.
Thank you.
Coming in, ready to walk us through a program. We put together some slides. If you want to get us going here, Ty.
Yeah. So today we're talking about DEQ and everything about Department of Environmental Quality here in Oregon. Just to start out, I wanted to kind of just quickly, for people who might not know, what does DEQ do? What is the point of DEQ? Because it's a huge agency, but I don't know if everybody in every part of the state really knows. Well, DEQ monitors, protects air, water, and land quality in theory, gathers air, water, and soil samples from 1,500 sites, so they cover a lot of the state. They handle things like Oregon's Air Quality Index, stuff like that. But I think a very important part of DEQ is that they write and enforce environmental regulations, and quite a few. So if you don't mind, I'll see how many.
Whoa.
2,000 plus regulations, and that kind of adds up to 8,200 pages, separate pages of rules. So when you do the math, that ends up being around 16, 17 reams of paper. And
Do you want to see what that looks like?
I think we should.
We came prepared.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
came prepared.
We do.
Let's get him out of here, David. Yeah, let's just stack them up. 2 at a time. Here, I'll let you have the last one.
Well, let's even them out.
Well, that's 16. Oh, we're a half a ream short.
Yeah. Darn.
Well, here, we're going to talk about this lawsuit later in DEQ.
I mean, so imagine that governs you. That's just one agency, and all of that governs what you can do with your property, what you can do with your business.
You know what would be interesting to know is how many of these rules were created outside of the legislative process.
Right.
Because I know that DEQ comes up with their own rules, or OARs, and they do it on their own. No legislation directs them to do it. It is really, every agency is this quasi fourth branch of government that is under the executive branch of the governor, and they go ahead and write out their own laws.
Yeah.
And let me add to that.
Yeah.
Not only is it for Oregon revised statutes, but they're writing their own rules for federal law.
Yep.
And at the same time, they're doing it for tribal law when those impact the state.
Right.
And that is done without legislative oversight.
At all. And we've tried to pass legislation and drafted legislation that requires those administrative rules to come back to the legislature so that we can have a checks and balance. And actually, LC told me when I did that it's against the Constitution because of the separation of powers, because the agencies work for the executive branch,
Right.
not the legislative branch, which I think is a bunch of BS. And we'll talk about that on No BS with DBS.
And, before you take the last two away, these are just the regulations on water, land, and air.
Yep.
Yeah, this
Just
is
think of
one-
everything
one
else
agency.
within the state.
Yeah, we did that. I did that math. It's over 40,000 rules and 30,000 plus pages. So
We don't have a big enough room.
no.
I do appreciate the paper, though. Comes from Senate District 1 and all those sustainable trees that
Okay,
we
that's
grow in the timber capital of the world.
Oregon Administrative Rule, you said OAR earlier. I want to make sure people watching understand what that is.
Sorry. Yes.
No, that's okay. But just to your point, though, specifically the Climate Protection Program and the 200 plus pages that were just dedicated recently to that program's implementation are driven by executive order.
Yep.
The legislature didn't pass a law that they had to interpret. The governor said, hey, let's go do this.
Right.
And that was Governor Brown at the time.
Correct. Okay, Ty, let's jump into the budget.
Yeah, let's jump into the budget. It's going to be fun. So yeah, DEQ budget. This is the agency request budget that I started out with here. We've got a lovely little chart that kind of shows us where the money is coming from, where it's being pulled from. You can see the vast majority coming from other funds, a bit from general fund, and a little bit of federal funds in there as well.
Not anymore.
Yeah. yeah, probably not. But yeah, you can kind of see where it's going. I mean, a lot of it non-limited, but there is definitely air quality followed by land quality and then water quality. Can't forget the 30 million or so going to debt service and 61 million going to just agency management too on top of that.
So Rep. Smith, I see other $711 million. And I know in some cases when we look at the budget and we say, okay, it's $59 billion of other funds. And in there, sometimes people will say, well, some of that's double counted. Some of that's money that's being spent from agency to agency. This money is not agency to agency money.
No, those are fees and fines.
Fees and fines.
That's what that represents. The vast majority of it is application fees, bureaucratic fees to get through a process, et cetera. And then the other part is penalties, fines, primarily on business and agriculture.
And
Right.
based off of what we just put up here, all of those reams and reams and reams of rules, they're then, you didn't look at ream number 13, and then that's how they get all that money.
So I think it's appropriate, really quick,
Yeah.
to share with the audience. So 1,600 pages of rules, right?
No.
Oh.
No, it was
8,200.
8,200.
Yeah.
16
8,200.
reams of paper.
16 reams of paper. And the legislature from the Chief Financial Office, which is part of the Department of Administrative Services that answers to the governor, gives us a presentation of 2 pages of bullet points, 2 pie charts, and a bar chart, and says, we want you to make a decision based upon this information.
right.
It's ridiculous.
894 people work for this department.
Yes.
It's a 13.6% increase over the previous budget. That's, again, this is the GRB that I'm looking at. I know the governor proposes and the legislature disposes, so we'll have our own legislative framework and budget considerations. But the governor, who is running ultimately these agencies, is saying that this is what she believes that they need. I had the opportunity to talk to the director and introduce her to our Senate Republican staff, and we had a wonderful conversation. And honestly, I'll give the director kudos for this. It's the first time ever I've met with an agency director where they said, I have enough budget, I have enough people to do what you've tasked me with at this point. So please, God, don't ask me to do anything else.
Interesting. That's positive.
I've never had that happen before.
Right.
Every other agency director I've ever talked to comes in and says, I need 26 more people, I need 20 more million, whatever the number is, to do just the stuff you've already asked us to do. And this is the first time Director Felton came in and said, nope, I've got what I need so long as you don't ask me to do anything else.
Was there any conversation with them about what could impact their budget should there be federal reductions?
Not in that conversation, no.
Yeah, that's the one area that'll be interesting to see because obviously the administration we're supporting is going to take a hard look at the way DEQ and EPA operate. And most likely there's going to be a reduction in federal funds, which means they're going to have to prioritize their activities. And hopefully they prioritize it by reducing those rules,
Right.
not coming back and raising fees. And that'll be something we're going to have to watch.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. This next one shows the growth of the budget over the years.
Before you jump in there, there is a OPB story actually that came out today. Trump targets climate laws with order that could derail Oregon's efforts.
Right.
There you go.
I mean, they're already looking at that because of the administration's America First policy and our ability to lessen the need to import these, energy sources.
Right. Right.
So there was a letter that we passed around the caucus today that I'm not sure if it went around the House side, but in the Senate that kind of compare and contrasted the Trump administration's approach, because they seem to highlight California's cap and trade program a lot. And we're going to get into it here in a second, but we wanted to raise our hands and say, if you think the $20 fee per metric ton of emissions?
It's it's actually, I think the market is $32 a
32.
metric ton.
Well, the climate protection program is going to be 120 plus.
That's right, in Oregon.
For the same
Once
thing.
again, that DEQ set by rule outside of the legislative process.
Yeah. Okay. Back. So there's the growth. The next slide, if you would. Now that's what the red line shows what we just saw, the legislative approved budget. If you just started in 2011 and you said, where are we? How much are we spending on DEQ? You could see what inflation adjusted 2011 budget would be.
With the yellow.
Relatively current service level, if you want to look at it that way. Just looking at inflation is the cost adjuster. And what we've done on the environmental side, I remember in 2017, I was appointed in November, and on my way in, I had the chance to talk to then departing State Rep John Huppin and then departing State Rep Mark Johnson, and they said, one of the things that we passed was coal to clean, and this bill, this measure, was kind of predicated on the conversation with Democrats that the push on environmental legislation would pause for 10 years. If we could do this,
Right.
then we
Right.
would
I
take
remember that.
we would take a break.
No. Then they came back the following year and started cap and trade
Right.
in 19.
So let me read this to you.
Yeah.
Package 120 within the DEQ budget request has on-site septic system permitting fee increase of 30%. Dredge and fill fee is increased by 20%. Wastewater operator certification fee is increased by 30%, and the underground injection control fee is increased by 15%. So part of what we have to ask ourselves is, one, do we even need some of these fees? And then second, looking at the growth of their budget, is it really appropriate that they're growing by 30+%?
Well, and so everyone needs to know that all the fees that the representative just outlined, I mean, your wastewater certification fees, so those are every single city, all those individuals that manage the wastewater treatment plants have to pay those fees. So your cities are the one that are paying it, and they're coming out of your dollars for your rates. So everything that you see up here, every single increase in that red line is a dollar that has been taken out of your pocket to fund that. In one way or another, they've increased fees on suppliers, they've increased fees for certifications, and it all trickles back to a consumer, a resident Oregonian.
I did forget to mention there's an air contaminant discharge permitting fee with a 20% increase.
Yeah, and I wanted to include this slide because I feel like a common thing that people will say just to get like the average person off their back is, oh well, adjust for just inflation. Like that's why it's always going to be more and more and more, and we're going to be spending more and more. Well, it's just because of inflation, right? And I wanted to just show like that's not the case.
No.
It's very much outpacing inflation year after year after year after year, more and more and more.
I call it Bidenflation, personally, but
There's another slide in the agency summary. If you look at the agency's proposed budget, and I'm sorry, we flag this and maybe add it later. Agency management from the 23-25 biennium was $49.3 million. In the 25-27 budget, it's 60.6.
I've got that right there down there, the 60.6.
Yeah, 60.6. But it's grown $11 million in a biennium,
Goodness.
which tells you, again, we're not putting boots on the ground. We're not putting people out doing work in the field. We're managing.
Well, and when you think about it, there's other layered, so DEQ handles what we've talked about. But when it comes to water quality, you still have ODF and W's budget that deals in that area as well. You still have DSL's, Department of State Lands, that is involved with that. You still have DLCD
Don't forget water resources.
and Oregon Water Resources. So you have,
And I'm pretty sure even the Department of Geology and Minerals,
that's right.
DOGAME, weighs in on that issue as well.
And they do. Like if there was, I'm dealing with an individual actually in Josephine County that wants to get a mining permit to actually extract to create clean energy. And anyway, they're fighting with DOGAME right now. And so DOGAME and DEQ are the ones that are involved along with DLCD.
And keep in mind, if there's any movement of dirt in any of these activities, then the State Historical Preservation Office has to weigh in.
Yep.
A lot of players there.
A lot of players. This is interesting. On that slide, it shows the growth from 2015. And right here, I'm reading that 42% of the department's total budget is fee-based. So with that type of growth, it goes back to, Senator, what you were just sharing, that either the taxpayer or a business owner is paying those fees for those reams of paper.
Yep.
But you know this as well as anybody. If a business is absorbing that cost, they're not just swallowing it.
No.
They're passing it through.
Every Oregonian's
So
paying.
the cost of goods going up. So you're either getting taxed or you're paying more for whatever good or service you're paying for at the end of the day. Like this is
Very much so.
driving cost.
Well, and Representative, you know better than anyone here, that chart right there in the last 10 years is actually a reflection of the overall state budget that is essentially doubled.
Oh, very much so.
So
Very much so.
this one agency's budget is doubled in a decade, but the entire budget for the state. So every agency, if you think about it, has done this in a decade.
Ty, let's roll.
Yeah, so you wanted to talk about the climate protection program,
Yes, please.
correct? Yeah.
Yep. Walk us through this first slide.
Yeah, so what is the climate protection program? Well, central policy for decarbonizing Oregon's economy. It's complemented by other programs, and it buttresses many other climate programs. I think you can speak a bit more about it probably than I can.
I always love the words, though, designed to hasten an equitable, clean energy transition. My question is, who equitable for whom?
Not Oregonians. Let me tell you that. If you and we'll get into this more, but we already have a transportation package that's we're talking about that increases the gas tax. Well, once we get into the meat of this, when you're talking about a 20-cent increase a gallon on fuel, but you're talking about a covered fuel supplier list within the CPP that is going to hasten not an equitable.
Right. Go to the next slide, Ty. So
Sweet.
you're asking, what are the climate programs that are connected, associated? There are vehicle standards, there are vehicle incentives, the Clean Fuels Program, which we know costs us 8 cents at least per gallon.
Something around that.
Building codes, efficiency programs, greenhouse gas reporting program. And again, I don't want to act like we don't care about the environment, because we absolutely do. Right. One of the things that makes Oregon great is our natural resources, our beauty, our natural beauty. We want people to come here and be good stewards. But at the same time, and we'll hear this word later in the program, what happens when those people that are doing business today leave the state?
Yep.
If you're a concrete plant, let's say you're Ash Grove Cement,
Yep.
and you're doing business out in Eastern Oregon, and you start weighing all your options, you say, man, it's far too expensive to produce this product here in Oregon. The demand for that product doesn't go away.
Nope.
That's right.
We still need concrete. We still need cement. And so is it China? Is it Texas? Where's the business going?
Well, and I think, each and every one of us, we will defend clean air, clean water,
Absolutely.
a clean state. We'll defend it to the end.
Yep.
The question is why do we have to have such inefficiency in the programs that DEQ operates?
Well, not only that, but the hypocrisy associated with it to this point of the movement of these companies out of Oregon, and we still need the product. We still have to. So we're importing it, and we're not importing. I don't know of any electric cement trucks,
Right.
and so it's what we call leakage. Right, we have leakage.
Sorry, I didn't say the word. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. So I mean, for example, we import 25% of our logs from Canada
Right.
on diesel trucks or trains into Oregon to then be processed.
Well, we just talked about Ash Grove. Right now, our greatest competitor in Oregon is China. And just imagine that. We are shipping concrete into Oregon when we have Ash Grove cement sitting right there in Baker County.
On a massive ocean-going vessel
Yep.
Right.
that's emitting carbon all the way across the Pacific
That
Ocean.
is correct.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the hard part for me. Like when it comes to the Lower Snake River Dam conversation, there's so many of these things that are not compatible within their own arguments as to what we're trying to accomplish. And I will continue to say, I just wish we would have a governor that would say, we're open for business.
Right.
Come do business here. Come live under our regulatory environment. Don't go to Texas where you can emit more. Don't go to China where you can emit more, plus have to pay for the emissions coming all the way across the ocean. Come here, employ people here, grow the tax base. Now we can raise taxes through just the sheer scope of who we're taxing as opposed to burdening individual taxpayers more. And we can pay for the programs that we need because many hands make light work.
Amen. It's interesting if you talk to manufacturers about DEQ programs, their number one frustration is that the goalposts always move on them. If DEQ would set up their programs and have a standard, business and industry, they'll meet the standard. They want clean air, they want clean water, but when it's constantly changing on them, and then they have to pay for those changes, and then they have to wait to get through a bureaucratic process that seems to never end. That's the frustration.
Well, and they want a reasonable time frame on an on-ramp, right?
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
okay, we can get there, but we can get there over this amount of time. Like the advanced clean trucks that we had a conversation in the transportation, we had an ODOT interview with Shelley and Bruce, and the technology is just not there.
Right.
So you're asking us to do something next year that maybe we might be able to do in 10 years if development of the emerging technology continues as it is, but it doesn't exist today. So we've got a bill really responsibly saying, can you delay this 2 years? I think it should be at least 10.
Agreed.
But we're asking for 2. And, oh, man, I don't know if we can do that. Well, you can't achieve your goal no matter what. Delaying it is the only sane thing to do. So anyway, we're going to go to the next slide here.
Before you jump into that, though, real
Yeah.
quick, when it comes to, my understanding is there was another state over on the East Coast, was it Maryland? Who
I know
was
what
it? Just rolled back they're rolling back their mandate for those electric trucks.
There are a few states that are.
Yeah. And then secondly,
California is the problem. It's their CARB program.
everyone needs to realize that when you look at these electric trucks or your electric buses, for example, they take the energy of roughly 1,500 single-family homes to charge every single day. And so when you look at the need for energy and the housing needs in Oregon and its growth just to be able to produce for those houses, as you're then penalizing the natural gas that we use to generate energy. We've already done coal to clean, as you mentioned, and you're pushing more and more onto renewables such as solar and wind. The wind doesn't always blow.
right.
The sun doesn't always shine. And then you have these peak events such as these ice storms where you need that more heat, but now they're penalizing the individuals that have the gas furnaces at home to supply their heat, the gas hot water heaters. They're pushing everything to electric, but there's not the generation to deal with the demand.
We'll play that further. And I just want to say amen again, but play it further. We have the most efficient and abundant source of power in hydro.
We do.
And you know what? Oregon does not recognize hydro as renewable.
We had a bill for that.
Oh yeah, I had a bill for that.
It's
Oh my gosh, I sound like DBS.
It's absolutely insane.
In committee, we got a hearing, and because I'm the vice chair of Senate Energy and Environment, and it was in committee, and we got a hearing for that, and we could not move it forward. I could not move it forward. You see that look you gave me?
No,
I could not move it
it
forward.
wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. We had a great hearing. People kept with the one kind of argument that the total conversation about the renewable portfolio standard was about increased investment. And I said, but if you divest those lower Snake River dams and what you have to then invest beyond that, you've got to capture it into the RPS. Otherwise, you're susceptible to losing the power generation and then have to double your efforts on the other end of what that investment would be.
Correct.
Plus, if you take the dams out, that's a multi-billion-dollar task to try and repatriate that land into a natural environment and restore the fish passage. And I'm not saying that there aren't some considerations about fish passage that we should take very seriously, but at the end of the day, that clean power source supplies. What's the percentage? I don't. I'm blanking on it.
Millions of homes and businesses. The Bonneville power system is pretty incredible.
Well, I mean, really, if you look at the Bonneville Power Administration, the BPA, they're providing energy to the state of Washington, Oregon, California,
Right.
And then it starts going east.
Yep.
And the spread is significant. The one thing, I have to go down a rabbit hole really quick. The one thing no one ever talks about when we talk about dams is the number one reason they were created, and that's flood control.
Yep.
And the dams you have to visualize like a set of dominoes. And if you take one out, it's going to impact the next. And at some point, if you were to take out the dams in the Snake River, that is going to have a significant impact on those dams on the Columbia, because the Columbia Snake River are a system.
Yes, sir.
And at the end of the day, remember what happened in Vanport 50, 60, 70 years ago with the Great Flood? That easily could happen again.
Well, go back to the Ash Grove cement conversation about the leakage and what happens if you push business out, and the compounding effect of not only having that produced in a country that has less regulation or a state that has, but then the transportation costs. You get rid of those lower Snake River dams and you can't get to Lewiston, Idaho anymore with barge traffic. And how many trucks do you put back on I-84? Now we got to go back to the ODOT conversation. We got a major problem. And the number one supposed, according to the scientists that are informing the DEQ, emission problem is tied to transportation. So you want to put trucks on the road in the name of saving the environment?
I think, David, you brought up a good point. Hypocrisy.
Oh, it's hypocrisy. I mean, during the middle of the cap and trade discussion, just real quick, a quick tangent. If they wanted or really cared about reducing emissions, I had drafted a piece of legislation because it was kind of eloquent the way they passed the privilege tax. When you buy a new vehicle, you pay a privilege tax to buy that vehicle, and then part of those resources go to a fund for low income, for EV rebates, essentially. And so I drafted legislation when pushing back against cap and trade there that said, hey, let's increase the privilege tax, but only within the people that live within the metro area of Portland, right?
Okay.
because it's where you register your vehicle, not where you buy it. And then we'll double the low income EV rebate. So then that would allow for low income families that are, I'm not trying to stereotype anyone, but are driving the 1980 whatevers that are sitting in stop and go traffic in Portland and spewing out their emissions. They would then be able to transition into an electric vehicle for less than nothing almost.
Right.
And that's where all the charging infrastructure is. Do you even think he got a hearing? No. Because they don't, the Democrats that are controlling the legislature don't care about reducing emissions. And in fighting this thing as the co-vice chair of Joint Committee on Carbon Reduction, it's always been about creating an environmental for-profit, nonprofit slush fund, which is what the CPP does.
Interesting.
So I want to go back to this because the internet's a wonderful thing. If barges can no longer use the lower Snake River, one barge carries 35 jumbo hopper train cars, 134 semi-trucks. If you remove it's the equivalent of at least 23.8 million truck miles annually.
Wow.
And would require 201 additional unit trains. So it's significant.
Very much so.
And I don't know about you, but I have not had a single constituent complain about barge traffic. They absolutely complain about truck traffic, and they also complain about train traffic.
Well, the reason we're having a conversation about a bridge over the Columbia River in Portland is because of traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your message is right on the mark.
Yeah. So walking through the background on the climate protection program, Ty, what's the first bullet point there?
Yeah, so 18-month process that developed the climate protection program, and starting in 2021, or starting in April 2020, and then to 2021.
Now, mind you, remember, March of 2020 is when we ended cap and trade.
Yeah. So we walked out, and not to, I hate talking about walkouts, but someone the other day said to me, when you guys walk out, it seems like you're just taking your ball and going home. Like you are not doing your job and you're throwing a fit. And I want to be clear, when we walked out, this was a big issue for us.
Yep.
And we did polling, we did message testing. Like we were engaged with our constituents, asking the question, can you afford a $6 billion new tax? Yeah. It'd be about $1,500 per, like we ran the math, we asked people. And when you said, hey, do you want to reduce emissions? People said yes. And when we said, how much would you be willing to pay in taxes to reduce emissions? And they said, $75 a year. That's what they said. And so when you said, well, this is a $1,500 per family per year program, people were like,
just to start.
I'm out, right? People were, I'm out. And so we went to Democrat leadership and we said, your plan is so unpopular with the people.
Correct.
You need to refer this to the people at the very least.
Yep.
Let the people vote because they don't like your plan. And Democrat leadership said, we don't care. We get the power. We get the authority. We get enough votes. We're moving this. And so get out of the way and just sit down and shut up and know your place. Your place is just to sit in your seat and cast your no vote, give your speech. And I don't know about you, but I didn't come to the legislature just to get steamrolled.
Right.
Right?
Well,
the people were asking us to stand up. Timber Unity showed up. Truckers, people from around the state, business owners came and...
Well, and they just real quick to add to that. But the other thing about this is once it was implemented and everything tied together, it couldn't have been unwound.
Right.
So even if the following year we were able to suddenly get a majority of Republicans in both chambers, we would not have been able to unwind what this bill,
The cap and trade.
would have implemented. It would have changed the economic system of the state, and we would not have been able to roll it back.
And I think Senate Republicans are patriotic for the steps you guys have taken.
Well, we were
And
in
that's
the House
coming.
at the
And
time.
that's coming.
We were in the House.
Remember, you
yeah.
were with us.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
2020,
I
this
hope,
is
we
going
can, I
back,
hope we
yeah.
can do some editing here on that one.
No, you're
No.
fine.
This is where I lost my gavel.
Yes, it
For what?
was.
Yeah, that's
This
the
is
part
what-
I want in here. I lost my gavel.
You did.
I forgot. Boy,
Yeah.
us House Republicans, we're patriotic.
You were chair of a committee at the time, yeah, and we walked out, and but that was a big decision.
Yes,
None of us
it
took that
was.
lightly.
Well, no, both.
That's right. I
So you were in committee, just real quick. It was in the committee. You moved the -60 amendment and requested that I came up and explained it because it was our amendment, the Republicans' version of cap and trade, which kind of set up a national program, and those dollars would have then come to Oregon. And then what really upset the environmental for-profit nonprofits is those dollars would have been invested into the very industries that were sequestering carbon in this state. So our timber industries that do a fantastic job of managing those resources and replanting those carbon sequestration engines, the grass seed industry that sequesters over 2 million metric tons of carbon a year. So then those investments would have came in so that they would have been able to help streamline their programs to reduce emissions even more and sequester more carbon. And the environmental for-profit nonprofits lost their mind. They had Peter at the time, President Courtney had to come in and to add a no vote.
I am remembering
because
this.
Senator Johnson voted with us.
I'm remembering this. Yes.
And then when they manipulated the system by having the Senate president at the time, God bless him, love him, and come in and add a Democrat vote.
Right.
That is when we left.
Yep, that's when they put their thumb on the scale.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I just want to be clear, we were standing with the people. Mm-hmm. And we had said the whole time, because I was in leadership, I was on the phone calls with Tina Kotek, at the time was Speaker of the House, and Christine Drazen was our leader, and she wanted an extra set of ears, so I would sit on those speakerphone calls, and I heard directly what we were talking about, interjected a couple things at times, but we had been very clear. Refer this to the people, and we'll come back and we'll finish. Because we knew it was a loser. We knew if you send it to the people, it was going to get voted down 70-30. Right. And yet Democrats postured the whole time, and effectively so, to the extent that people still believe this, that Republicans were hijacking the system, Republicans were whiners and babies, and we couldn't just lose with dignity and grace. And so standing with the people, but not having the political machine or the media backing to convey our message more effectively, we get branded.
Well, you know what? But the three of us are heroes then. We're patriots.
Well,
you were working with Drazen. You had the intellect, and I was making a motion.
Well, and that's right. But the people were with us to the point where, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but we gained seats in the House.
Picked up seats.
We gained seats in the House and the Senate, and that same time in that election cycle.
Not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but I do remember on those phone calls, Speaker Kotek telling us, I don't care if you come back because you're going to lose. Now that you've walked out, we're going to win everything, and we're going to come back with a quorum-proof supermajority. And to your point, we won. Ty, hit us with the last 3 bullet points here.
Yeah, so
just read them out.
December 2021, EQC adopts Climate Protection Program. 22, January, program starts January 1st, registered all regulated fuel suppliers, issued compliance instruments as well. And then 2023, minor rule modifications, Court of Appeals invalidates rules, and procedural failure.
Right. So flip to the next slide. We'll just leave that up as we talk about this real quick. But previously, so we implemented this. The state of Oregon, through executive action, implemented a program, had people buying into the program, trying to conform to the rules and regulations, spending significant amounts of money. One specific example that I've tried to help coordinate some conversations with HF Sinclair, appealed this process as we transitioned out of this, because ultimately the court said, hey, that first approach was not done correctly.
That's right.
And you'll see here on this chart, the DEQ chose not to appeal the court's decision. They opted to regroup and rebrand and readopt a program through rulemaking. And in that process, the people that had spent money complying for that short temporary period, January 22 to 23, before it was thrown out by the courts, people were spending money. People were complying with the rules. We were reducing emissions from fuels, like it was happening. So it's not that this program can't be effective, but we were concerned about leakage. We were concerned about the mechanism with which it was unfolded. And yet people were abiding by the program and spending significant amounts of money. So now we fast forward.
So really quick, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the goalposts being moved on these folks.
Oh, it
Absolutely.
gets worse.
I
It
mean,
gets worse.
and that costs industry a lot of money that they pass on
That's right.
to the consumer.
And they didn't receive any benefit at the time.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So when it was rolled out, the original, if you go to the next slide now, you know, you had this process where you had the rule advisory, in case anyone was wondering what the RAC, the RAC meeting, the rule advisory committee gets together and they say, well, how do we want to draft these new rules? And you bring stakeholders in. So the people that are going to be under the regulatory environment of this framework, people that are special interests. We got nonprofits that are definitely interested in this program. We've got government in the room talking about how do we want to build this program. And in these conversations, some of those people that had paid to conform said, what happens to the investment that we made that wasn't honored in the original agreement? Do we get credit for that moving forward?
Because it's millions.
It's a big number.
Yeah.
Can we get credit for that moving forward? Can we have a real conversation about the investment that we've already made, and shouldn't that count? Is there anybody in their right mind that would say no to that?
And the drum roll, and the answer was
I'm sorry. Like, thank you for conforming, but the new rules are going to be slightly different. And so you've got to conform to those, and you'll have to buy into those. And so we're moving forward now. November 2024, the EQC, the Environmental Quality Commission, adopts the Climate Protection Program, and away we go. So go to the next slide here. So what is this? We're maintaining significant emission reduction trajectory. We're going to show a chart here in a minute. The community climate investments will exist as a mechanism. And we're distributing all these climate instruments at no cost. And this last one is the one I want to highlight: prioritizing benefits and reducing burden for Oregon's environmental justice communities. Just out of curiosity, what is an environmental justice community?
I'm out. I don't know.
It has a broad definition, I would imagine.
So environmental justice is racial justice, gender justice, accessible spaces, so ability-centered green public spaces, culturally relevant food and sustainable thriving wage, employment in communities. You know, that's a human right. Climate justice, transportation justice, housing justice. So environmental justice sounds to me like it's a political tool.
Oh, most definitely. That is why I call them the environmental for-profit nonprofits, and then there's the political for-profit nonprofits that work with the environmental for-profit nonprofits.
It's so awesome that you've put this podcast together to bring this information out to the public. I just learned something. I had no idea until you just
So right
shared
now,
this.
Well, if I, just real quick on your point with the definition of environmental justice communities, that was the big sticking point. Because then when we were talking, because we were dealing with cap and trade back in 17, 18, 19 too, and then Representative Bentz, then Senator Bentz, now Congressman Bentz was on the other side, and it was him and I, and we were trying to define, because they're like, well, we want to invest in rural communities. Okay, how? Let's go ahead and pencil out how we're going to invest in rural communities. Well, we want to invest in impoverished communities. Okay, well, how are we going to do that? And they would never, ever put anything in writing of how those dollars were going to be spent in rural Oregon, in our districts.
Interesting.
Ever. Because they wanted to keep the definition broad, as Daniel just laid out.
Should we move on to the chart here?
Yeah, go to the chart. So if you look at greenhouse gas forecasts and what HB 2021 was the clean energy targets were set, and then you've got what we're forecasting with DEQ's climate protection. And the reason why I wanted to showcase their chart is I want to revert back to a conversation we had over the Carbon Reduction Committee. And we said on the record. You asked the question. Tell your story.
Well, I do. So we had, when we talked about leakage earlier, right? We talked about how that works. The environmental for profit nonprofits always talk about, we have to reduce emissions. We must reduce emissions. But at the end of the day, Oregon does not produce emissions. In fact, I have a chart here where if you look at, and this is according to the EIA, State Energy Data Systems, the metric tons of carbon dioxide per person, we have Oregon as the 45th in the nation.
Yeah, the fifth lowest.
The fifth lowest in the nation. But I think where the senator was asking is, I asked the Director Whitman at the time, in committee, what would happen if Oregon, because Oregon's carbon reduction, Oregon produces 0.14% of the greenhouse gas emissions on the global scale. 0.14%. And so, but it's costing Oregonians hundreds of millions of dollars.
Most definitely.
Prior to even the CPP, right? And so I asked the director, I said, if Oregon were to go to carbon zero tomorrow, what impact would that have on the global scale? And the director of the DEQ at the time, Director Whitman, said, Representative Brock-Smith, you are correct, that Oregon's portion of global carbon emission is, I'll use the word minuscule. And then I asked the same question in a later committee meeting with then Dr. Philip Mote, the director of the Oregon Climate Services and Oregon Climate Change Research Institute. I asked him what impact would be on the global climate if Oregon were to reduce their emissions to zero. And he responded, the impact would be imperceptible.
Wow.
But it is not imperceptible to every Oregonian's pocketbook, to every industry that is trying to grow and create jobs, to the transportation sectors that have to eat up this. Because when you look at what the Climate Protection Program and the covered fuel suppliers list, think of any type of gasoline, propane, natural gas, anything. And what it's stating that they want to do is you have covered emissions that are set at basically 100,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And then, and that is they're using the year 2020. And so then as you move forward, and the list is based on the emission from 20 to 23, that the applicable threshold for liquid fuels and propane supplies declines over time, was what they're trying to do, from 100 million metric tons to 25 million metric tons. And so they are expecting for you to go to 50 by 2028. And so the problem is this, when you think of this program, is, well, let me add a real quick tangent. Everything in my district in Southwest Oregon costs more than it does in Senator Bonham's district, right? Well, especially when you think of the Port of Portland and everything that comes in, because the apple grown in Hood River that you buy at the local Fred Meyer, the transportation associated with getting that apple to the local Fred Meyer is much less than it is for the transportation from Hood River all the way to Brookings, Oregon.
Right.
And so all of those costs are layered on top of everything. And the idea that that truck is not going to exist, that we're suddenly going to have Star Trek style, the opportunities to teleport elsewhere, it does not exist. But you're going to be layering on these costs because people are going to still need to drive cars. Trucks are still going to need to be on the road. People are still going to need to heat their homes. And it's only going to cost more for the individuals to do that, because the whole purpose of what they're trying to do here to get to that reduction line is for you not to use fossil fuels.
And then you start thinking about the opportunity cost of what all this means and what those dollars families could be using them for.
Yeah.
what businesses can be using those saved dollars for. And instead, we're going down a path that's going to have minuscule benefit,
According to Dr. Moat.
but cost families money.
Well, cost families lots of money. I mean, disposable income, as you mentioned, is going to be taken away. And then it only impacts the inflationary cost in the state of Oregon, right? Because as the cost of the local restaurant for their heat and the pizza joint that uses propane, or excuse me, natural gas for their pizza oven, that is going to continue to increase. That pizza joint still has to pass that on. So the cost of that pizza is going to increase as those costs for the pizza joint increase.
Most definitely.
So I threw this slide up just to showcase that this is not a cap and trade system like California's got. This is a cap and reduce system, cap and eliminate, however you want to think about it.
Yep.
But our emissions are designed to go down. This will be a cost driver. Go ahead and hop to the next slide. So what are we doing with the money? Right? Like at the end of the day, we're surely taking that money and reinvesting it in the things that will help our industry friends reduce emissions, helping our transportation friends reduce emissions. You're shaking your head no, Senator Smith.
Well, that's what the Republican version of did from cap and trade in 2020. But
So if you look at this slide, so you got these covered entities that can earn credits by contributing funds. This is an interesting way of phrasing that. You've got the Community Climate Investments Group that are going to implement projects.
Okay.
Part of the reason why I had to tell you what environmental justice was, so you know what we're investing in.
yep,
Doesn't necessarily have to do with reducing emissions. It has to do with helping our special interest friends and people that we believe to be the voting base of the Democrat Party in the state of Oregon, that we're going to essentially use the money to keep them part of our coalition.
yep.
Most definitely.
It couldn't be more transparent than that to me. This is not about saving the planet. This is not about cleaner air, cleaner water. This is about getting money into the pockets of our friends so that they continue to support us.
I wish everybody would just start using the political for-profit nonprofits and the environmental for-profit. Because that's what, I mean, and then they turn around in some aspects and then donate those same dollars to Democrat political candidates.
I have to tell you, this has been fascinating to me. You know, I live in this little budget world, right, where I receive the information from the majority, from the governor's office, and I'm asked to take that information, digest it, and make decisions. You two are turning a light on for me, bringing the policy side into the budget. This is fascinating.
Well, there's no better person in the legislature that I'm aware of that you and when it comes to budget and what you know and what you do, sir. So thank you.
Well, we've got some powerful people on the budget side. Fred, he's amazing. Reschke, you too. I mean, we got some powerful thinkers. This though is new to me, and so I could tell you I have a little bit of research to be doing this weekend.
But with the definition that the senator laid out of what the environmental justice communities is, this is a slush fund.
Exactly.
An unregulated slush fund that you're taking from industry and Oregonians in their fuel bill and their heating bill. And as we mentioned earlier, now you lay the transportation package on top of that.
Right. Well, Senator Bonham, good job on this.
Well, so the group that is going to run this fund from the first time around, because all you had to be was a 501c3.
That's right.
You didn't have to have any core competency. You didn't have to know how to get rid of
You're gonna love
carbon
this.
emissions. This is a group called Seeding Justice.
Yep.
I just encourage people to do their own research on who these folks are and what they're trying to accomplish. But they will be potentially in control of a significant amount of money.
Now, and my understanding is they were the only ones to apply
The first time around.
the first time around.
Anybody want to start a nonprofit?
And secondly, isn't it interesting that the individuals that you talked about before on the first time around went ahead and paid for their credits, right? Or their offsets. They went ahead and put ahead their dollars. And they didn't get any credit for that for the second time around. But by goodness, that one environmental for profit nonprofit that put in the first time around, they still got the job.
Wow.
Definitely.
So I don't want to extend this podcast out too long, and we got another topic that's super important. Let's roll to the next topic.
Yeah, so we were talking, Representative Smith was talking about how, it's fascinating to hear about the policy stuff. It's also fascinating to hear just about like what goes on inside this agency on the day-to-day. And of course, we would have to include the DEI stuff that's going on inside DEQ. Now, I looked at this. They have a 27-page DEI plan. I read through all of it. It's interesting. And then a 30-page affirmative action plan, which a little bit redundant, but so 60-odd pages discussing that. People should go look it up and read it. I'm certain it's very interesting. But yeah, that we've got all these positions in DEQ that are DEI positions. I believe a few of those are going to, or their agency wants them, is requesting those positions. But yeah, in these plans, talking about anti-racism, which if you know the history of that term and what that comes from Ibram X. Kendi, that very radical person who's even right now being kind of tossed aside by Wall Street and big business because they think he's too radical. It's a kind of a thing that happened during the pandemic, and then now he's kind of out of style, out of fashion. But yeah, the kind of the anti-racist dialogue of, how to be anti-racist, that you can't just be not racist. You have to be an anti-racist. It's only racist or anti-racist. And this is how you be an anti-racist. So essentially that's kind of in there. Another thing is this DEI consulting firm that somehow has ended up in the middle of DEQ in a really kind of intimate way, engaged to change. And we have this lawsuit that we found that centers engaged to change. If Senator Bonham wants to introduce that right there.
Yeah. Now I'm curious what the best thing to do is. Jacob, I'm going to rely on our producer, Jacob, to decide whether or not the camera should be on the faces of the gentleman to my right as I read some of these passages from this lawsuit. And I've got some sections I'm just going to read, and we'll get through them, then we can talk about them. Page 10 of this lawsuit, section 42. As part of those efforts, DEQ also started to segregate employees on the basis of race. Let me read that again. As part of those efforts, DEQ also started to segregate employees on the basis of race. For example, Mr. Whitman announced that employees would be given an hour per week on work time to enter into so-called safe spaces set up exclusively for non-white employees.
Mm-hmm. And for those that are wondering, Whitman was the former director of DEQ.
And this is a federal lawsuit, and I'm just reading from the complaint. Section 61, DEQ is so deeply scornful of certain of its employees that it saw fit to endorse the statement, whiteness is a death sentence.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Section 62, organizational assessment created by Engaged to Change. This was disseminated from DEQ that all employees were required to read and absorb and put that into practice. And this is nuts. DEQ instructed its employees that whenever an opportunity presented itself, they were expected to advance the interests of non-white applicants and employees at the expense of anyone who had experienced white privilege, meaning anyone categorized as white.
So if this is true, the state of Oregon better get its checkbook out because this is going to be expensive litigation.
But again, I think, one of the biggest challenges I have is one, first and foremost, I don't think the color of anyone's skin quantifies their talent or
At
merit
all.
At all.
Right.
But even within the subset of folks that are underprivileged, there's a significant portion of the state of Oregon that would include folks that happen to have white skin.
Individuals in my district.
For example, DEQ instructed its employees to decenter, I should have put my air quotes back up, decenter the voices of white employees and to center voices of color. In other words, if a meeting were held at which both white and non-white employees were present, DEQ required that the non-white employees be permitted to speak and their views be accepted as valid, while the views of white employees were to be treated with skepticism and dismissiveness.
It's just crazy. It's crazy.
This is racism in itself in a lot of ways.
I mean, this is offensive. Like the whole thing, like I'm going to read one last one and then I'll shut up about this. But the OA is replete with statements that denigrate some employees on the basis of their race. For example, the operational assessment, asserts that white folks are unconsciously invested in racism. Like just fundamentally, you're guilty, period, just based on the color of your skin. And I just reject this wholeheartedly. And I don't understand how this infiltrated an agency.
Well, it's worse than that. Just so you know, I mean, we got the presentation. I'm on the Public Safety Subcommittee. Mm-hmm. We got the presentation from the Oregon Youth Authority that is going through a bunch of turmoil right now as well, and it's in the media. And their agency's presentation was covered with DEI policies. Mm-hmm. Covered. In fact, and so in talking with some of those employees that want to remain nameless because of the impacts, they have told me that this DEI policy and push actually supersedes the training that they need to be able to manage the youth within their organization. That they are actually making it a priority to do this over what is necessary.
Well,
to do
you
their
mentioned
job.
in it the like hour-long safe space.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that looks like. I haven't been in one, but I mean that's on they're working. They're working. They're sitting in a room for an hour.
As a member of the legislature and the minority, I want an hour-long safe space in the Capitol.
No, but for me, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but what happened to Martin Luther King, the content of your character?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, is it? And I really like, selfishly, from Generation X that I'm from, I feel like my generation grew up not really caring about the color of your skin.
At all.
At all. We didn't care. We just cared whether or not you wanted to go play Foursquare or whether or not you wanted to go play like we literally we wanted to play with anybody.
Right.
Like, let's just go have fun. Let's shoot hoops. Let's play baseball.
Yep.
Let's have a good time. And to have this just kind of intrinsically woven within the framework of a state agency and validated and affirmed by the state agency as if it's gospel, this engaged to change.
Well, we've even seen this when we have to go through our training every year.
Right.
I mean, I remember a document where I have to be conscious of my white privilege.
Yeah, the unconscious bias training that Tina Kotek put us through in 2019 was the last time I attended training. And I went to her afterwards and I spent about 15 minutes in her office. And I said, you just told me that if I was a white, male, Christian, father of two, with a dog that lives in the city, that I'm what's wrong with society. Thank God I don't live in the city for half a second there. I thought you were talking about me.
Yeah, exactly.
And within the framework too, it was like, if you believe in predictable financial outcomes, if you believe in rugged individualism, these conservative principles, you're just fundamentally wrong. Like that's what was taught.
Yep.
And I was like, what am I doing here? Like
It's crazy.
just meant to make me feel bad about who I am.
Well, and I think it's also important to point out the engage to change. I tried to find more information. I was not super successful at finding more information, but I think that's definitely something for people listening to try to do. We should find more information on I don't know who these people are. I don't know how much they're being paid. These things aren't very clear, and we got to keep in mind that it's coming out of our paycheck a bit there too.
Well, and not only that, but this lawsuit, that's the federal lawsuit, is being defended by the DOJ.
Most definitely.
And
Yeah, we're spending money on this for sure.
the cost associated, I mean, not just the checkbook, as you mentioned earlier, to pay the plaintiff,
Right.
but the fact that this is going to cost millions, probably in our own resources at the Department of Justice, to fight.
And play through that. Those dollars that we're going to have to use to defend this could have funded a teacher.
Yep.
Times. I'm guessing by the time we're done, times 100.
Yeah.
And I think that's what sucks the most, going back to Senator Brock Smith's earlier comments about where we sit nationally in terms of our global footprint of carbon emissions. And we're investing hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, quite frankly, to move the needle on something we're good at. And to your point, Rep. Smith, our schools are failing.
Right. Well, you mentioned, I've got to do this.
Yeah.
You mentioned this organization, Seeding Justice. And you talked about the role that is having,
And there-
its role tied to carbon reduction.
potentially hundreds of millions of dollars that they would be.
But let me read this to you. I'm looking at their 2024 annual report. And it says the Oregon legislature approved the creation of the Reproductive Health Equity Fund with a $15 million investment. At the time, the fund was one of the largest publicly funded abortion funds in the country. And today, only 2 states have what leading reproductive health policy organizations that are similar.
And that investment was made in the border with Idaho
That's correct.
in an effort to entice young women who were potentially facing abortion restriction in their home state to come to Oregon at Oregon taxpayer expense and receive an abortion.
And if you remember, this money was hidden in one of the rebalancing budget bills at the very end of session when people, just to be really candid, are tired.
Yeah, ready to get out of the building.
Get ready to get out of the building. And the notion that this would be hidden in there is deplorable.
Well, it is. And then the connection to the Climate Protection Program is the organization that got the bid to divvy out hundreds of millions of dollars of Oregonians out of the Oregonians' pockets to go to the excuse me, Senator, the where the dollars are going, the climate justice.
Oh, the CCI.
Yeah.
People need to download this annual report. You will be absolutely.
Selection criteria. Seeding Justice will prioritize projects that are led by Black and Indigenous people and other communities of color, especially those that identify as LGBTQIA2S+, immigrants and refugees, folks living with disabilities, people living with low incomes, folks that are currently or formerly incarcerated, homeless people, and those living in rural communities.
I'm glad we got there last. Even though we're the ones that are going to be impacted the most, because my rural Oregonians have to drive farther to go to get for regular services or products.
And I think kind of just to summarize this entire thing, what we've been discussing today, I mean, one of the big themes of this podcast, I think, has been mission creep. I started by saying land, air, water, and we haven't mentioned it since. I mean, truly, that's because that's not really what they're focusing on
That's
at the
very
end of the day.
astute.
And when we're looking through all this stuff, it's not because we don't care about that stuff. It's we think they should be focusing on that stuff, but they're spending their time, safe spaces, and time, energy, money, and safe spaces, and climate justice, whatever that means.
And one quick point when it comes to, the overall picture of the CPP and the fact that it's a joke. They don't want to reduce emissions. They want to generate resources to fund what you just said, Senator, is when we talk about where we're at, we're the 5th lowest in the nation as far as, producers. Mm-hmm. But what that doesn't account for is the fact that Oregon, and that's roughly about 65 million metric tons of anthropogenic emissions. We've actually reduced that down to about 61 million metric tons. But we sequester our state because of the natural resources, because we are good stewards of our lands. We sequester, just the forest in Oregon alone, sequester roughly 31 million metric tons of carbon every year, emissions. So almost half of the carbon emissions that we produce, just our forest sequester. So when you look at the wheat industry up in Northeast Oregon, mm-hmm. and you add the amount of, because the combines that are harvesting that wheat are part of the 65 million metric tons. Right. But the amount of carbon sequestered by the wheat itself is not calculated.
Interesting.
Grass seed in the state, right. We're the grass seed capital of the world. The combines, the equipment to grow that grass seed, to process that grass seed, is part of the 65 million metric tons of anthropogenic emission. But the 2.3 million metric tons of carbon that are sequestered annually by the industry are not calculated. So if you look and you add all of those things together, we sequester more carbon through our natural and working lands in this state, more emissions, than we produce as a state.
Interesting.
Okay, our final segment, everyone's favorite part of every episode of DOGE, reality check.
Yeah, so
take us away, Ty.
Yeah, so our reality check bill this week, we're looking at House Bill 2945, which it establishes a policy across the state for the purchase of zero-emission school buses, and that doesn't sound as bad. I mean, it's the reality is that, I mean, it's mandating certain percentages in how many school buses have to be zero emissions. One of the things by 2035, 90% of school buses in disproportionately impacted communities, whatever that means, should be zero emission school buses. And then by 2040, 100% of new school buses purchased in the state of Oregon should be zero emission school buses. And you had a fun fact about school buses, Senator.
I mean, you look at
zero emission.
One of those buses takes the energy to charge every night the equivalent of roughly 1,500 homes, single-family homes. So if you think about the amount of energy that is needed while you're taking away, so everyone comes home, right? Everyone comes home. They turn on their oven. They turn on their hot water heater. They turn on they plug in their electric vehicle. The infrastructure within the grid in just any given street in Portland cannot handle if you were to take out the natural gas infrastructure that provides so much energy. It is insane. This is virtuistic signaling. There is no way that we can meet this, and there is no way we can produce the energy to get there. Battery storage will not be there to be able to do this in this amount of time. I mean, they talk about, if anything, we're going to have climate refugees, I call them, but we're going to need to grow more food for people in Oregon because more people are going to move to Oregon. And yet we can't keep on putting solar panels on farmland if that's, because we're going to need to be able to have that farmland to grow food for people, unless we want those emissions to be produced as you're packing that food across the country.
So selfishly, Ty, before you speak, I want to pick on you. You said whatever that means, and on the very slide you have the definition.
I did include the definition. I was gonna throw that in there. Well, the thing that's interesting about it is that We don't know what that means. Because guess who's going to decide what that means?
Oh, the EQC. Wonderful.
Back to this right here, you know? We don't, just more rulemaking, you know? So it's not really clear. And that's, I took that straight out of the bill.
Fair enough, fair
Straight
enough.
out.
Well, again, I had a bill.
I only
that would-
rescind half of what I was saying.
if we would have been able to pass that legislation for the metro area of Portland, it would have been Oregon's Obama cash for clunkers idea, and we would have better air quality in Portland because those electric vehicles wouldn't be spewing out in stop and go traffic. But no, nobody wants to talk about that.
Well, gents, we went a little long.
I want to conclude with this. At the end of the day, all of us want clean air and water.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. We just need DEQ to look at the way they manage themselves, really refocus on air, water, land, and get out of this other junk.
Core mission.
And do
you
it
for that.
in an
Yeah.
efficient manner, in a manner that business and industry can afford.
Right.
That's my take.
No, I
Final thought?
No, I fully agree with you. I mean, my district, every person on both sides of the aisle in Southwest Oregon and Douglas and Curry and Coos counties, they love to fish their rivers. They want clean rivers. They want clean water. They want clean air. And really, the impact of the air in my district is from the catastrophic wildfires, because these same environmental for-profit nonprofits that stand to benefit from the millions and millions in resources are the ones that stop our ability to manage that timber resource so that we can mitigate those wildfire.
Harvest it, graze it, or watch it burn.
Yep.
The one thing that has been very consistent in conversations I've been having with Senator Mike McLean is the concern about posterity. I don't know any farmer, rancher, timber baron that isn't concerned about posterity. I don't know anybody that doesn't want to be a good steward for generations to come.
That's right.
I can't harvest all my resource this year and have none for next year, right? I've got to reseed, I've got to replant, and I've got to have a stand that I can harvest years from now. And so I think the biggest misnomer in all these conversations is somehow industry is the enemy.
Right. At the end of the day, they're our partners, and we need to partner with them to make it work.
And we've seen globally that the people that can afford to care the most about the environment are the ones with the means to be able to pay for the change that they want. Creating wealth, creating access to wealth is the greatest thing we could do to
It
solve
is
any
good.
environmental problem.
Yes.
Wealth creation is good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. Ty, thanks for putting together the slide deck.
Absolutely.
Great to have you here again tonight. And thank you, Rep. and Senator Smiths.
That's true.
That's right. The
Thank you.
Smith brothers.
Smith Square.
Indeed.
Have a great night.